Hello, good evening. I'm Father Alexander. This is St. Peter's Hove. Welcome. And we're about to take our 76th, I think, step through the Bible in our walking tour. And we're on the book of Ruth, chapter 2. And indeed, we'll also be looking at chapter 3. How feminist a story is Ruth? Well, this used to be one of the big things we'd always ask when I was at university doing English literature several decades ago. They'd say, well, how feminist is Jane Austen? How feminist is, for example, the story Pamela, the novel Pamela? To what extent are these stories where women are the protagonists, women are setting the agenda, and women are showing they're not going to be pushed around by men? That's one of the things you can ask. Well, actually, the answer is, of course, feminism as now exists and been invented at that time, but it's quite a feminist story because the protagonist is a woman, the protagonist is two women. The major relationship is between two women rather than between a woman and a man. Ruth is obviously looking for a man. She needs a man. In those days, everybody was married. The idea of being an unmarried woman was simply not feasible. It was just it would have been impossible. It would be so unusual. But she's looking for a man to provide for her mother-in-law, her former mother-in-law. So, if you like, it's a sort of a three-way relationship. The really important relationship was with the other woman. Boaz has a walk-on part as the one who is going to solve the problem for them. That is to say, provide them with a family, provide them with a home. At the same time, is this a romantic story? Is this a love story? Is this one of the oldest love stories we have? Yes and no. There was a love story, if you remember, embedded in the book of Genesis when Rebecca sees Isaac and falls in love with him and covers her face. That, I think, is extremely eloquent of it's the greatest love story ever told, in the sense that it has in it the root of all love stories. Boy meets girl, or in this case, girl meets boy and falls in love with him. Here, Boaz is clearly a nice person. Boaz is incredibly generous to Ruth. Boaz likes Ruth. But it's not purely personal, this loving relationship that develops between Boaz and Ruth. Boaz realizes that Ruth needs protection. Ruth realizes she needs protection. Both of them realize they have sort of family responsibilities. In other words, it's not a purely private alliance that's being forged between them. It's a public alliance. And that is very important. When you get married, you don't just consult your own personal desires, your own personal inclinations. Nowadays, we've privatized romance. We've privatized love. I love so-and-so, the rest of the world can go and hang. Romeo and Juliet, much better if they'd never met, because their love destroyed two families and indeed caused endless civil strife in Verona. Well, though at the end, I suppose they patch it up. But the idea is that when you marry, you have your family's welfare at heart as well as your own welfare. The marriage is an alliance between two families. This is very, very important. A lot of people nowadays complain, or at least so I've heard, they don't like their in-laws. So I've married this bloke or this girl, but I don't like his mother, I don't like her mother, I don't like his father, I don't like his uncle, and so on and so forth. Hang on a sec. This is really very odd. So you love the man or the woman you've chosen, but you don't love them in context. You love them out of context. Boaz loves Ruth in context. He wants to help her. Ruth loves Boaz in context, the context being the need to find a protector for herself and her mother-in-law, and the need, we'll see, to provide her mother-in-law with an heir, a legal heir. Now, Boaz's love for Ruth is seen in that he provides her with a living. He says, make sure she is looked after, and he even goes so far, let her glean among the sheaves themselves. She doesn't have to keep to the edges of the field. Do not molest her, he said that before. This is verse 16, chapter 2. And be sure you pull a few ears of corn out of the bundles and drop them, so she can pick them up. So this is sort of cheating, gleaning. Just chuck some wheat in front of her so she can pick it up legally. So it's sort of a present. Let her glean them and do not scold her. People are always telling people off, aren't they? Well, don't, he's saying. So the servants must have said, oh gosh, he really likes this girl, doesn't he? This Moabitess has just turned up from nowhere. Right, she's special. We must be nice to her. So she gleaned in the field till evening. Then she beat out what she'd gleaned and it came to about a bushel of barley. That's about 40 litres. It's a hell of a lot. It's enough to keep you going all year, I should have thought. Taking it with her, she went back to the town. Her mother-in-law saw what she had gleaned. Ruth also took out what she had kept after eating all she wanted and gave that to her. Her mother-in-law said, "Where have you been gleaning today? Where have you been working? Bless be the man who took notice of you. You've done really well. Good Lord, you brought back a ton of food." Notice the practicality here. This is really very important. The Book of Ruth is a bit like Jane Austen in the sense that love is important, but practicality is really important. You mustn't fall in love with somebody who is not going to be able to look after you, who's not going to be able to provide you with a living, who's not going to be able to give you a decent home. And of course, as we know, for example, in several of Jane Austen's novels, people have made romantic marriages which have been, in the end, disastrous because of poverty or lack of a true meeting of minds. And she told her mother that she'd been working for Boaz, and the mother's very, very pleased that she'd been working for Boaz. It says, "This man is our very near relation." In fact, he's probably about the third cousin, but the nearest relation they've got. And so she stayed working with Boaz's workwomen. And then she says, after the harvest is over, her mother-in-law arranges that she should marry Boaz. How? How do you arrange that? Well, the mother-in-law says, there's going to be a sort of a harvest supper. Go, wash your hair and put on your perfume, put on your nice cloak. And then when everybody lies down in the barn to go to sleep, go and lie at Boaz's feet, which is tantamount of asking for Boaz's protection, asking Boaz to marry you. And it is her mother-in-law who decides on this. Now, and Ruth says, rather extraordinarily says, chapter 3, verse 5, "I will do everything you tell me." Which is extraordinary. So she's saying, you go off and marry this man. I'll do whatever you tell me. Quite extraordinary. Not a rebellious daughter, let alone a rebellious daughter-in-law. I will do whatever you tell me. She obediently takes up the challenge of marrying Boaz. Obviously, she's seen Boaz and she sees that Boaz is an ideal husband for her, but her mother-in-law tells her to marry Boaz and she's happy to obey. Everything comes together. I think what this book is telling us that if you're in love with somebody and everybody in your family is opposed to it, they're trying to tell you something, and that is the person you've chosen is not the right person for you. And as a matter of fact, I do know of quite a few cases where this has happened, where a young lady has said, "I want to marry this man," and the mother has said, "Oh no, my dear, he's not right for you." And of course, the young lady has taken against her mother because she said this. Then 20 years later, she's admitted that the mother was right, though she may not have admitted it to the mother, she's admitted it to herself, and that makes her hate her mother even more because her mother was right and she should have listened. We don't really ever say to our relatives nowadays, "I will do everything you tell me." Perhaps we should. Perhaps we should allow ourselves to be guided by our families. It's just a thought. Nowadays, we all want to be independent and autonomous, but we're not atomic beings. We are molecular beings. We belong in families, we belong in communities, and we need to take account of the people around us. Sometimes people get married and they really do upset their relatives by doing so. I'm thinking particularly, let's say, in India. Let's say if a Hindu girl falls in love with a Muslim man, if she goes off and marries him and becomes a Muslim, she'll never see her Hindu family again. And therefore she breaks the bonds that held her and she forms new bonds. We don't want to break those bonds that hold us. We want to reinforce those bonds that hold us because those bonds that hold us are good bonds to have. Ruth says, "I shall do everything you tell me." Not overtly feminist, that sentiment. So is Ruth a feminist tract? Not really. But when she says, "I'll do whatever you tell me," she doesn't say it with a weary voice. She says it with, not really with resignation, but with contentment. "I'll do whatever you tell me because what you are telling me is the right thing to do. And I find my joy in doing what you say." That is to say, my gift to you is my obedience to you. My love of you is expressed in doing what you say. Quite often, when children make their first confessions, one, they have lists of sins and so on. They say, I did not obey my parents. And you say, well, why didn't you obey your parents? Oh, I don't know, because they told me to do the washing up and I didn't want to do it and so. But don't you realize when your parents ask you to do something, they're asking you to do something because they love you and because what they're asking you to do is good for you. Notice this beautiful relationship, parent-child, between Naomi and Ruth. Our parents love us, let's love them back. It's such a rich story, I think. We've just done about 20 verses, but there's more to go. So, and incidentally, this just shows how Boaz has really picked a gem, hasn't he? Because she loves her mother-in-law so much. Just imagine how much she's going to love Boaz. Bye.